At my own wedding anniversary party, I gave my husband a painting that I had spent 7 months creating by hand. His mother brushed it aside, saying, "It looks like something bought at a flea market." Everyone fell silent. My husband burst out laughing and had the painting removed to the storage room without a word to me. I didn't protest, nor did I leave. 6 hours later, I walked into the storage room to retrieve the painting, only to discover a secret that would make my husband's family regret everything. Your being here means more than you know. Tell me in the comments what city, what country are you joining from today? Let's see how far this story has traveled. This story includes fictional elements for entertainment and educational purposes. Names and settings are not drawn from specific individuals or places, but the human experience at the center of it is something I believe you'll recognize. I want to tell you about the night I carried 7 months of my life into a room full of people and watched it get dismissed in under 10 seconds, and the way those 10 seconds turned out to be the most important thing that ever happened to me. It was a Saturday evening, September 6th, 2025, just after 7 o'clock, and the Voss estate on the edge of Hardenville was exactly what it always was when Sandra wanted an audience: immaculate, impressive, and cold in the way that expensive things often are. The ceilings in the main living room ran up to 14 feet. The floors were pale marble that clicked under every heel. The floral arrangements alone probably cost more than my first month's rent when I moved to Hardenville 8 years ago, 25 years old and convinced I was walking into the beginning of something good. 30 guests. I had counted the RSVPs myself because that was the kind of thing I did. I managed the financial records at Voss Development Group, which meant my whole professional life was built around making sure numbers matched, documents lined up, and nothing important slipped through without someone accounting for it. Inside this house, I did the same thing on a different scale, tracked the details that kept everything running, kept everything looking right, kept the version of our life that other people saw intact and believable. Tonight was our 5th wedding anniversary. I had carried the painting in from my silver Camry myself, arms wrapped around the frame, angled sideways through the side entrance so the corners wouldn't catch the door frame. It was 24 by 36 inches of stretched canvas set in a walnut frame I had stained with my own hands, wrapped in brown craft paper folded 4 times at each corner because I wanted it to feel like something worth opening slowly. I had started it in March of 2024, early mornings before work, Sunday afternoons, late nights in the garage after Derek had gone to sleep. I finished it in October 2024 and kept it wrapped and stored for 11 months, waiting for exactly this moment. It was a portrait, oil on canvas. Our wedding photograph reconstructed by hand, Derek and me and Harold, Derek's father, who had been gone for 14 months and whose absence in this room felt like a draft coming through a wall nobody wanted to admit was cracked. I set it carefully on the gift table near the entrance. Derek glanced at it once, then turned back to his conversation. I told myself that was fine. He'd see it properly when we opened it. Sandra had been the one to suggest that gifts be opened in front of everyone. I remembered how unusually enthusiastic she had been about organizing this evening. She had chosen the guest list. She had chosen the caterer, the florist, the timeline. At the time, I had thought she was finally trying. Standing here now, watching her move through the room with that practiced ease, touching elbows and tilting her head at just the right angle, I was starting to read that differently. The room filled. Guests in cocktail attire, the kind of people who attended these events regularly enough to look relaxed doing it. Gabe Ortiz moved through the crowd with his professional camera. He had been hired to photograph the evening, a detail Sandra had arranged, pausing occasionally to frame a shot. He was 34, quiet, the kind of photographer who seemed to see more than he let on. Near the far corner of the room, Patricia Howell sat with a cup of tea, rather than champagne. She was 66, a longtime friend of Harold's, introduced to me once years ago as an old family friend, in the vague way people introduce someone they don't want to explain. I had never thought much about why Harold always called her when something mattered. Tonight I noticed she wasn't looking at the other guests. She was watching the room. Across from me, my younger sister, Jenna Reeves, 29, an interior designer, the one member of my family, the Voss family, had ever seemed to genuinely welcome, was seated next to Colton near the fireplace. She had a glass of sparkling water. Earlier, she had told me she was on antibiotics and couldn't drink. She looked fine. She looked perfectly fine. She just wouldn't meet my eyes. Sandra called for the gift opening at 8:30. The room gathered. I unwrapped the painting myself, peeling back the craft paper slowly the way I had imagined doing this 100 times. The canvas came into the light. 30 people looked at it. The room went quiet for exactly the wrong reasons. Sandra tilted her head. One finger tapped the rim of her champagne flute. When she spoke, she used the voice she reserved for observations she wanted everyone to hear, but could always claim she hadn't meant loudly. "This is handmade." A small smile passed through the room like a current. I kept my voice steady. "I painted it. It took me 7 months." Sandra set her glass down. 7 months, sweetheart, you could have simply bought something. People notice these things, you know. I looked at Derek. He looked at the painting, then at the room. Then he smiled in the direction of his business partners. "She does things like this," he said with exactly the lightness of someone changing the subject. "Very Natalie." Soft laughter, not cruel, just enough. I stood there holding the empty wrapping paper. A few minutes later, Derek signaled one of the catering staff without looking at me and said to take the painting to the storage room at the back. No question, no glance in my direction. Later, as the last guests were gathering their coats, Sandra stopped beside me in the hallway. She placed one hand briefly on my arm and offered a small patient smile. "Don't be sensitive about it, Natalie. It looked like something from a garage sale. You know how people are." I nodded. I had been nodding for 5 years. Across the room, I watched Patricia Howell set down her teacup with quiet deliberateness, her hand moving to the pocket of her blazer. She wasn't looking at Sandra. She wasn't looking at Derek. She was looking at me for just a moment, steady and unreadable, before she turned and walked toward the exit. I stood alone in the hallway after everyone else had drifted back toward the living room. Through the glass door at the far end of the corridor, I could see the dark shape of the storage room at the back of the property, where my painting was now sitting in the dark. Harold had said something to me 14 months ago in the last real conversation we ever had. Something I had carried without ever fully understanding why. That night, standing in that hallway, it came back to me not as a memory this time, as a direction. After the last car pulled out of the driveway and Derek went upstairs without saying goodnight, I stood at the kitchen sink and allowed myself something I almost never did. I went back. The catering staff were still moving quietly through the main rooms, gathering glasses and folding linens. I could hear the low scrape of chairs being rearranged, the soft clink of crystal stacked carefully against crystal. The kitchen itself was half dark, the overhead lights off, only the under-cabinet strip lighting casting everything in a pale amber glow. I had turned those on myself years ago because Harold had mentioned once that he liked working in the kitchen at night when the lights were low. I had never changed them back. I stood there with my hands in warm water, and I let myself do the thing I had been refusing to do for 14 months. I went back to the last real conversation I ever had with Harold, and for the first time I listened to it correctly. He had been in his study at the estate. This was July 2024, 3 weeks before he died, though neither of us was using those words yet, even though the pancreatic cancer had moved faster than his doctors had predicted, and we both understood what fast meant in that context. He was thinner than he had been at Christmas. The afternoon light came through the half-drawn curtains in long, pale bands across the dark wood shelving. There was a glass bowl of spearmint candies on his desk, the way there always was, always full, until suddenly it wasn't. I had brought peppermint tea, which was the wrong kind, but he didn't say so. He just smiled and moved some papers to make room for the tray. We talked for a while about things that didn't matter and then about things that did. At some point, he asked about the painting. "You're still working on it," he said. Not a question. "Maybe 2 more months," I told him. "I want to get it right." He was quiet for a moment, looking at me with that particular stillness he had when he hadn't yet said the thing he actually meant. "When it's finished," he said, "put it somewhere people can see it. Don't wrap it up and put it away. It's a gift, Harold. It has to be wrapped. Then make sure the right person receives it," he said. "And make sure you're in the room when they do." I smiled and changed the subject the way I always did when a conversation started to feel like it was asking something of me I wasn't ready to answer. He let me. That was the thing about Harold, he never pushed. He would say a thing once clearly and then leave it in the air for you to pick up when you were ready. Then, just before I stood to leave, he said the part I had been avoiding. "When the time comes, you'll know what you need to look for. I've made sure of that." He picked up his pen and set it down again, a small, deliberate movement. "Don't look before you're ready, but don't wait too long after." I asked him what he meant. He smiled the way he smiled when he thought he'd said enough. He reached into the glass bowl, held out a spearmint candy, and asked about my drive over. That was the last time I sat in that room with him. Standing at the kitchen sink, now drying my hands on the dish towel, slowly I thought about the storage room. The painting sitting in the dark. Don't wrap it up and put it away. Then I thought about something else. Something small I had filed away and not thought about again until right now. A few months before that July conversation, I had been away for work, a 2-day accounting conference in the next county. When I came home, there was a note on the kitchen counter in Harold's handwriting. He had stopped by the estate while I was gone. "Just checking in. Spearmint on the counter. H." At the time, I had smiled at it and thrown it away. He was always stopping by. He had lived in this house for 30 years before we did. But the painting had been in the garage that week. On the work table. Unfinished, unframed, unattended. Standing in this kitchen at 11:45 at night for the first time, I thought about that differently. Harold had been in the garage. Harold had been alone with the painting. Harold, who 3 weeks before he died told me I would know what I needed to look for and that he had made sure of it. I set the dish towel down. The storage room was 30 steps from where I was standing. I thought about the kind of person I had always been. The kind who talked herself out of things. The kind who waited minimized, told herself not to make it a bigger deal than it was. The kind who nodded in hallways when what she actually wanted to do was ask a direct question out loud. Harold had said, "Don't wait too long after." It was 11:48. The estate was completely quiet. Derek's light upstairs had gone off. Tonight I thought might be the after. The storage room at the back of the Voss estate was where things went when Derek didn't know what to do with them, but couldn't bring himself to throw them out. I had understood that without anyone telling me the same way I had understood most things about this house quietly over time, by paying attention. I didn't turn on the main hallway lights. I knew the layout well enough to move through it in the dark, past the mudroom, past the utility closet, through the side door that opened onto the back corridor. The motion sensor in the storage room clicked on when I pushed the door open, a single overhead fluorescent that buzzed once before steadying into a flat, colorless light. The painting was exactly where the catering staff had left it. Propped against the far wall, still in its brown craft paper, the ribbon I had tied around it now slightly loose on one side. 2 hours in this room had not changed anything about it. I carried it to the kitchen, set it down on the white marble island, stood in front of it for a long moment in the dark and the quiet and the hum of the refrigerator with Derek asleep upstairs, and the estate completely still around me. Then I unwrapped it. I had not looked at this painting without an audience in 11 months. I had finished it in October of last year, and wrapped it the same afternoon because I knew, if I left it out, I would keep adjusting it. Keep second-guessing the shadows under Derek's jaw, the angle of the light on Harold's shoulder. That was the thing about working from photographs and memory. At the same time, the memory always wanted to correct the photograph. Now I looked at it without anyone watching. 7 months of Sunday mornings. The three of us reconstructed from wedding photographs, and from the version of this family I had believed in when I started. Harold's eyes had taken me the longest, that particular expression he had, like he was already thinking of the next question. I had repainted them 4 times before they looked right. Derek's face I had painted in a single afternoon. I stood there and noticed carefully that I was not crying. I noted that, filed it somewhere. Then I turned the painting over. The back of the frame was covered in brown craft paper, the standard method for protecting oil paintings and keeping the canvas backing clean from dust. I had made this frame myself in March of last year from reclaimed oak boards I found at a salvage yard on the county road. I had assembled it on a Saturday morning, fit the canvas, pressed the staples along the inner edge, and sealed the back with craft paper from a roll I kept in the garage. I had done it alone before I'd made the first mark on the canvas. I ran my fingers along the inner edge of the frame. Then I stopped. Lower left corner. Something was not flush. Not a staple. I knew what those felt like. This was a raised edge, slightly rigid, rectangular, roughly the size of a standard envelope. I worked my fingers under the edge of the craft paper, carefully peeling it back in one slow strip. What I found was not part of anything I had built. Fixed to the inside of the wooden frame, not to the canvas, but to the oak frame itself, was a small white envelope, sealed. On the front, in Harold's handwriting, for Natalie. When the time is right. My hands went completely still. I was aware of the silence of the house. I was aware of Derek upstairs. I was aware that 14 months had passed since I sat in Harold's study and watched him reach into a glass bowl of spearmint candies and decide he had already said enough. I opened the envelope. Inside, a small brass key, the kind used for a safe deposit box or a personal security lockbox, not a house key, and a single folded sheet of paper on Caldwell and Associates letterhead. The return address read, Mill Creek County Road 4. The note was in Harold's handwriting. I read it once fast, then again slowly, then a third time, because I needed the words to mean what they meant. Natalie, if you're reading this, the family has shown you who they are in a room full of witnesses. Go see Raymond Caldwell at Caldwell and Associates in Mill Creek. He has been expecting you. The land was never Derek's to inherit. It was always going to be yours. Don't tell Derek, don't wait. Harold. I sat down on the kitchen floor. Not in a chair. On the floor back against the island, both hands holding the paper, the brass key pressed into my palm. I stayed there for a long time. At some point, I said it out loud, very quietly, to no one. He knew. Not that the party would happen. Not that Sandra would say what she said. Harold had known something far simpler and far older than that he had known who these people were, and he had known that eventually, in a room full of people, they would make sure I knew it too. I said it again, still quiet. He planned this. Then I folded the note with the same care I would have used for something irreplaceable, because that was what it was. I placed it and the key inside the zip pocket of my jacket, lining the one I kept for things I could not afford to lose. I stood up. I looked at the painting on the island. At Derek's face rendered in oils I had mixed myself. At Harold's eyes, which had taken me 4 attempts to get right. I carried the painting upstairs and set it against the wall across from the bed facing me. I did not analyze why I did that instead of leaving it downstairs. But when I lay in the dark 20 minutes later, staring at its outline in the low light, one thought kept returning, not about the note, not about the key, but about the week the blank canvas had sat in the garage before I made a single mark, and about a small piece of paper left on a kitchen counter, just checking in. Harold had always been very good at just checking in at exactly the right moment. I didn't sleep. I lay on my side of the bed in the dark, listening to Derek breathe on his side, and I did something I had been carefully avoiding for 8 years. I counted. Not money. Not hours. I counted the moments I had let pass without asking the question that was sitting right in front of me, and I tried to understand how a person gets to 33 years old, intelligent enough to catch financial discrepancies in 40 minutes flat, and still manages to miss the ones written into her own life in plain sight. I had come to Voss Development in 2017, 25 years old, an independent auditor hired by Harold, not Derek. Harold had been specific about that. He wanted someone with no existing relationship to the company. Someone who would read the fine print. I had read it well. 3 weeks in, Harold called me into his office and opened a file on his desk. It was a subsidiary called Brennan Holdings, and there was a discrepancy in the footnotes that the previous auditor had missed for 2 full years. Our previous auditor missed this for 2 years, Harold said. You found it in 40 minutes. It was in the footnotes of the subsidiary filing, I told him. He looked at me for a moment. Most people don't read the footnotes. I always read the footnotes. He nodded slowly in the way he nodded when he was deciding something. 3 months later, he asked me to come on full-time. I said yes because the work was interesting and because Harold made the kind of offer that felt like being seen rather than being hired. 2 years after that, I married Derek. I became the internal finance manager of Voss Development Group. I became the person who understood the complete structure of the company from the inside, every subsidiary, every lease arrangement, every line of credit. I became the person junior staff quietly came to when they couldn't find something, when a number didn't reconcile, when a vendor contract had language that didn't match the invoice. I stayed late. I knew every file. At company events, I was introduced as Derek's wife. Never by my professional title, not once. I lay in the dark and let myself count those moments too. I thought about Diane Mercer, our internal accountant, sharp and efficient, someone I had trusted as close to a friend as I let myself have inside those walls. Lunch 2 years ago, the two of us at the table in the break room with the window that faced the parking structure. You're the only person in this building who actually understands how the money moves, she had said, folding a paper napkin into a square. That's my job, I said. No, your title says internal finance manager. What you actually do is keep this entire operation from collapsing. Those are 2 different things. She had looked at me evenly without softness or accusation. Just fact. I just think you should know that someone notices. I had thanked her and changed the subject. 2 years ago, I hadn't known what to do with someone noticing. Then there was Marcus Webb. He had been the director of project development at Voss, brought in by Harold 5 years back, the kind of person who understood both the construction side and the financial side of real estate development, which was rare and worth paying for. Derek had never liked him, which I had noted and filed away without examining why. About 2 years ago, roughly 8 months before he was fired, Marcus had caught me in the parking structure on a Tuesday afternoon. 4th floor near the stairwell. He had that look people get when they've decided to say something they've been holding. Natalie. He stopped. If you ever need anything documented, anything from the past several years, you know where my office is. I had looked at him. I'm sorry. I'm just saying. He put his hands in his pockets. If the time comes, you'd know what to look for better than anyone. I had nodded the way I nodded at things I didn't understand and kept walking. 6 months later, Derek had restructured the development division and Marcus was gone. Officially, it was a budget reallocation. I had processed the termination paperwork myself. Now at 3:40 in the morning, I understood what Marcus had meant. I understood what Harold had meant. I understood what Diane had meant. I had spent 8 years reading everyone else's footnotes and had never once thought to read the footnotes of my own life. I thought about the party. About Sandra, who had organized every detail, the guest list, the caterer, the timing of the gift opening. I had told myself she was trying. But Sandra did not do things without a purpose, and the purpose of 30 guests was not intimacy. 30 guests were 30 witnesses. The word condition arrived in my mind then from somewhere I couldn't quite place. I didn't know yet what it applied to. I hadn't read the trust documents, I had only read Harold's note, but the word sat there with the specific weight of something that had always been true and was only now becoming visible, the way the Brennan Holdings discrepancy had always been in the footnotes 2 years before anyone looked. Harold had told me I would know what to look for. He had told me he had made sure of it. At 5:47, I got up, dressed, Put on the jacket with the zip pocket. I did not leave a note for Derek. I had spent 8 years leaving notes. Explanations, context, apologies for taking up space. This morning, I walked out the front door of the Voss estate, got into my silver Toyota Camry, and did not look back at the house. For the first time in 5 years, I had somewhere specific to be. The roads between Hardinville and Mill Creek run straight through land that goes flat and gold in the fall, the kind of drive that gives you too much time to think and too few landmarks to stop you. I had left the estate before 6:30. The Camry's thermometer read 51 degrees. The sky was the pale gray that comes before a proper sunrise, and the highway was empty enough that I could see the full length of it ahead of me without another set of taillights in sight. I didn't turn on the radio. I thought about why Harold had used Caldwell and Associates. Not a firm in Hardinville. Not anyone connected to Voss Development's usual legal roster, which I knew well. I had processed enough retainer invoices over the years to know every attorney this company had ever paid. Caldwell and Associates was in Mill Creek, a different county 40 minutes away. I had never once heard Derek say that name. Not in 5 years of marriage, not in 8 years of working in the same building. Harold was careful. Harold had always been careful. I thought about the land. In 8 years of managing Voss Development's financial records, I had learned the structure of the company, the way you learn the layout of a house you've lived in long enough, not by studying a floor plan, but by moving through it in the dark until you stop walking into things. I knew which parcels were owned outright by the company, which were under contract, which were held in subsidiary names for financing purposes. There was one I had always found unusual. The original 47-acre parcel, the land where Voss Development's headquarters building stood, did not appear on the company's balance sheet as an owned asset. Instead, the company paid rent on it. A long-term ground lease, which is a legal arrangement where a company builds and operates on land it does not own, paying the landowner directly while retaining rights to the improvements. The lease had been drawn in Harold's personal name. I had asked Derek about it once early in my tenure. He had said his father had structured it that way for tax purposes, and I should leave it alone. I had left it alone. I read fine print for everyone else. I had not read that one. Now, on the empty highway at 6:40 in the morning, I let myself follow the logic all the way. Harold had purchased that land before Voss Development existed. He built the company on land he personally owned and leased the ground to the company rather than transferring the title. He had never conveyed ownership of that parcel to Derek. He had never moved it into the company's name. For decades, Harold had held that land under his personal name, and when he died, it passed according to his personal estate plan, not through the company at all. I pressed 2 fingers against the zip pocket of my jacket. The key was still there. I turned into the Caldwell and Associates parking lot at 7:12. The building was 3 stories, modest brick, the kind of professional office that looked like it had been there for 30 years and planned to be there for 30 more. Nothing like the glass and steel tower on Commerce Boulevard where Voss Development kept its offices. The second-floor lights were on. I sat in the car for 90 seconds. Not because I was afraid, because I was trying to hold everything I had figured out in the last 6 hours alongside everything I still didn't know, and I wanted to walk in there with both clearly in hand. Then I got out. The reception area was quiet. No staff, just a waiting room with upholstered chairs and a table of current trade publications. From the hallway, a man in his late 50s appeared. Silver-haired, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, coffee mug in one hand. He looked at me, then at the envelope I was holding, and his expression settled into something that was not surprise. It was recognition. "Mrs. Voss, not a question. You were expecting me," I said. "Harold told me you'd come on a Sunday morning." He spoke evenly without performance. "He said you'd come alone. He said—" He paused briefly, and I understood he was choosing to tell me something Harold had specifically wanted me to hear. "He said you would be the most prepared person to ever walk into this office, even if you didn't feel that way when you arrived." He extended his hand. Raymond Caldwell. I shook it. Behind him, a door at the end of the hallway opened. A man in his early 30s came out, dark hair, slightly unruly sleeves, already rolled to the elbow, a legal pad tucked under one arm. He looked at me directly without any of the performance that people sometimes use when they're meeting someone in difficult circumstances. Raymond turned slightly. This is my son Ethan. He's been working on this matter with me. He's been on it for 20 months since the first day Harold walked into our office. Ethan didn't add anything to that. He just extended his hand. Mrs. Voss. His voice was even. Whatever Harold put in that envelope, we built everything around it. We've been ready for a long time. I looked at the brass key in my palm. 5 years of handing things to people who took them without looking. This was the first time someone had been waiting not to take, but to help me open. I closed my hand around the key and walked down the hallway. The conference room at Caldwell and Associates smelled like old wood and fresh coffee, the kind of room where things get decided quietly without an audience. I had spent 8 years in rooms built for performance. I had forgotten rooms like this one existed. Raymond set the lockbox on the table before he sat down. Steel the size of a shoebox with a single brass keyhole centered on the front panel. He placed a manila folder beside it and left space between them as if both deserved room. I put the brass key on the table. Raymond unlocked the box. Inside, a sealed legal envelope, a smaller personal envelope in Harold's handwriting, and a USB drive with a handwritten label. Before I open this, Raymond said, setting his coffee down and looking at me directly, I need to be clear about my role. I am the trustee of this document. Harold appointed me to manage and execute it according to his instructions. I am not your litigation attorney. If Derek chooses to contest anything here, you will need separate legal representation, someone who advocates specifically for you. Harold anticipated that possibility. He asked me to have a referral ready, a firm in Mill Creek with no connection to Voss Development. I can provide that name today if you need it. Does Derek have grounds to contest? I asked. In my professional opinion, no, but I'll explain the reasoning as we go through each section. He opened the legal envelope and removed a document of several pages. He walked me through the key points steadily, in the measured way of someone who had rehearsed this, not for performance, but for clarity. Harold Voss had executed an irrevocable trust 20 months ago. An irrevocable trust, Raymond explained, is one that cannot be changed or revoked by the person who created it once it is signed, unlike a revocable trust which can be altered at any time. Harold had chosen this form deliberately. It meant that after the document was executed, no one, not Harold himself, and certainly not Derek, could modify what it directed. The trust transferred full legal ownership of the 47-acre Hardinville parcel to Natalie Reeves Voss. The land had been registered under Harold Voss's personal name since 1987, predating Voss Development Group by 4 years. It had never been transferred into the company's name. It had never been conveyed to Derek. Harold had held it entirely as personal property throughout his life, and it passed now through his personal estate entirely separate from the company's assets. The transfer is unconditional, Raymond said. As of the date of Harold's death 14 months ago, this land belongs to you. It has belonged to you since then. There was no trigger, no condition on behavior. Harold simply instructed me to present this directly to you and only when you came to me yourself without Derek's knowledge. That instruction was his protection for you. If Derek had known before you did, he would have had time to complicate the situation. Can Derek contest the transfer itself? I asked. To successfully contest a trust in this state, a party must demonstrate that the person who created it lacked mental capacity at the time of signing, was acting under undue influence, or that the document itself contains fraud. Harold was of sound mind. He was not pressured. The document is properly executed and witnessed. Raymond's voice was level. Derek may attempt to challenge it. I am telling you honestly that I do not believe he will succeed. I looked at the document on the table. 47 acres. the ground under the headquarters building where I had spent 8 years keeping the company's finances intact. The land I had seen listed as a personal ground lease and been told once to leave alone. Why did Harold wait? I asked. Why not just tell me? Raymond was quiet for a moment in the way of someone deciding how much of a private conversation to share. He tried once, he said. He told me you weren't ready to hear it. He said. Raymond glanced briefly at the table, then back at me. He said, she'll come when she's ready. I just need to make sure she has somewhere to go. Raymond pushed the second envelope across the table. Harold's handwriting on the front. Read this alone if you need to. I opened it. The room was quiet. Natalie, you're reading this because you finally stopped waiting for permission to look. I'm sorry I couldn't say this in front of you while I still could. You are the only person in this family who understood that a company is built by the people who do the actual work. You did that work. The land beneath that building has been yours in intention since the day I watched you find the Brennan discrepancy in 40 minutes. Now it is yours in law. It was always going to be, Harold. My hands were steady on the paper. My eyes were not. Across the table, Ethan reached over without speaking and placed a glass of water beside my hand. He didn't look at me when he did it. He turned back to his legal pad immediately. Just the glass set down quietly, no performance. I would remember that. I sat with the letter until I was ready to fold it. Then I folded it along the original creases and placed it in my jacket pocket alongside the key. Raymond waited. He had the patience of someone who had done this work long enough to understand that there are moments in a meeting that require stillness rather than progress, and that pushing through them costs more than they save. When I looked up, he closed the legal folder and set the USB drive on the table between us. Harold left one more thing, he said. He asked me to wait until after you'd read the letter. He said. Raymond paused, and I understood he was quoting directly. She needs to know she's already standing before she sees how far the fall could have gone. I looked at the USB, small, labeled in Harold's handwriting, sitting on the table like something ordinary. In the past 2 hours, I had learned more about my own life than I had in the previous 5 years. I didn't know what was on it. But I picked it up, turned it in my fingers, and understood that for the first time in a long time, I was not afraid to look. There is a difference between understanding something in your mind and watching evidence of it move through time in someone else's hands on someone else's camera. I had lived in the first kind for years. The USB drive was about to put me in the second. Ethan opened the drive on the conference room laptop. 2 files, both clearly labeled in Harold's handwriting when Raymond had extracted them to the desktop. The morning light through the Mill Creek windows was fully up now. Sunday quiet streets below the kind of still that belongs to a town not yet awake. Raymond spoke before either file was opened. I want to explain the documentation on this before you see it. Gabe Ortiz was engaged through this office under a formal documentary filming contract. Harold paid him through our client escrow account, a separate holding account this firm maintains to process payments on behalf of clients, fully documented and auditable. I have the original contract and payment records here if you need them for any legal purpose. He set a second thinner folder on the table. The contract describes the purpose as documentary process recording. Harold was precise about the framing. The first file was labeled GO Studio Documentation, May 2024. Ethan pressed play. The footage opened on the garage at the Voss Estate, Natalie's painting area, identifiable by the work table and the specific angle of the side door light. The canvas was on the easel 2 months into its work. The timestamp in the lower corner read, May 14th, 2024. Harold walked in alone. He was thinner than Natalie remembered him being that spring. The cancer had been moving faster than anyone was admitting out loud. He moved carefully, deliberately, carrying a small white envelope. He crossed to the wooden frame, the reclaimed oak frame Natalie had built and left in the garage before she'd gone to work, and with slow, intentional hands, he fixed the envelope to the inside back panel. He smoothed the craft paper over it. Then he stood and looked at the canvas for a long moment. Not the frame. The painting itself, 2 months of Sunday mornings already visible in the brushwork, even unfinished. He placed one hand on the frame briefly. Just the frame. Then he walked out. The footage ended. The room was quiet for a few seconds. "He came when I was at work," Natalie said. "He called Gabe the week before," Ethan said. "The contract specifies documentary process recording. Harold was specific about the frame, no pun intended. He said," Ethan glanced at his notes, "I need a record that proves intent and timing, not what's inside, just proof that it was placed there by me deliberately on this date." "Did Gabe know what was in the envelope?" Raymond answered. "Gabe knew there was an envelope. Harold didn't tell him the contents. He said, 'The less Gabe knows, the safer he is.' But I need someone with a camera and a conscience." The second file was labeled for Natalie H.V., May 2024. Natalie reached over and pressed play herself. Harold appeared on the screen. His study, the dark bookshelves, the glass bowl of spearmint candies on the desk, the half-drawn curtain. He was looking directly into the camera. This was the same day as the garage footage, or close to it, the same degree of thinness, the same careful way of holding himself. He had known by May how little time was left. He had come to the garage, placed the envelope, walked back to his study, and recorded this. He said, "Natalie, if you're watching this, you found the envelope and you found Raymond. That means you've gone further in one day than I thought you could, which means I always underestimated you a little, and I'm sorry for that." He paused. Something moved across his face, not quite a smile, but the expression that preceded one. "I want to say something that has nothing to do with property or law. I want to say I saw you. I always saw you. I watched my son take the most capable person in that building and slowly persuade her that she was lucky to be allowed in the room. I watched my wife help him do it. I am ashamed of both of them." Another pause. His voice dropped slightly quieter, more direct, as if the camera had moved closer even though it hadn't. "You were never invisible. I just couldn't say it loudly enough while I was alive. I'm saying it now. The land is yours, because it was always going to be yours. But this..." He looked at the lens with the particular steadiness of someone who had decided exactly what they wanted to leave behind. "This is just me telling you what I should have said to your face." The video ended. Natalie didn't move for a while. Ethan closed the laptop. Raymond said nothing. They gave her the room, not a performance of patience, just actual stillness, the kind that costs something to maintain, and both of them were willing to pay. When she finally looked up, her voice was even. "What happens now, legally?" Raymond straightened the folder in front of him. "Now, I contact the Voss Development Board of Directors. I'll do that this morning once you and I confirm you're ready to proceed." He paused. "Before I do, there's a name in Harold's trust notes that I want to mention to you. Someone Harold specifically referenced by name. A man named Marcus Webb." Natalie went still. She knew that name. She knew it from a parking structure on a Tuesday afternoon, and from a line in a quarterly report she had filed and not read carefully enough, and from the particular way Marcus had looked at her when he said, "You know where my office is?" Like he already knew she would eventually need to, and in that moment she understood why Harold had made sure it was written down. "Before I reveal what Marcus had been holding on to for 8 months, something Derek never expected anyone to find, drop a 8 in the comments so I know you're still here with me." A quick note: the story ahead contains fictional elements and may not reflect any specific events or individuals. If that's not the kind of content you're looking for, it's completely okay to step away now. No hard feelings. Raymond told me that Marcus Webb had called this office 5 months ago, 2 weeks after Derek let him go, and that Harold had left instructions if a man named Marcus Webb ever contacted Caldwell, and Associates Raymond was to tell him that when the time came, someone would reach out. Marcus had waited 5 months. He arrived in 25 minutes. Raymond explained the context before Marcus got there. Harold's trust notes had referenced Marcus Webb by name. Not as a witness, not as a party to the document, simply as the most honest man Derek ever fired. Harold had known Marcus discovered something significant about Voss Development's finances. He had made sure Raymond knew the name, and he had left standing instructions in case Marcus called. Marcus had called 5 months ago, 14 days after he cleared out his desk on the 4th floor. Ethan made the call while I sat with my coffee. I heard him say quietly into the phone, "The document has been activated. She's here." Then a pause. 25 minutes is fine. Marcus Webb was 41, dark-haired, with the kind of tired that settles into a person who has been carrying something heavy for a long time without anyone to put it down with. He shook my hand at the door, looked at me for a moment with the expression of someone recalibrating a mental image, then sat down across from me at the conference table. "Raymond told me the document was activated," he said. "I've been waiting for that call for 5 months." "Did Harold tell you this day would come?" Harold told Raymond. "Raymond told me there was a trust and that when someone came in with the key, that was the moment." He set a manila envelope on the table. "My attorney has the originals. This is a certified copy." We moved to Patsy's Diner 20 minutes later. Raymond's suggestion, a corner booth away from the Sunday morning crowd, the kind of place where the coffee gets refilled without being asked, and no one pays attention to what the people at the corner table are saying. Marcus walked me through it steadily, the way someone talks when they've rehearsed a thing many times and finally have the right audience. 8 months ago, while conducting a routine internal review of the development division's asset transfers, Marcus had found a transaction from 2022, 3 years prior, that didn't reconcile with the company's property ledger. A 43-acre undeveloped parcel in the eastern county had been conveyed to a Delaware limited liability company called Heronfield Property Solutions. The transaction was listed as an intercompany transfer, but Heronfield was not a Voss Development subsidiary. Marcus had traced the ownership structure through 3 layers of holding companies before he found it the ultimate beneficial owner of Heronfield, meaning the actual person who controlled and benefited from the asset was Colton Voss. He paused to let me absorb that. Delaware LLCs are commonly used in legitimate business structuring. He said, but they're also the most common vehicle for obscuring beneficial ownership in the United States, because the state doesn't require disclosure of who actually owns or controls the entity. You can put 3 holding companies between you and an asset, and on paper, it's very difficult to trace without knowing what you're looking for. You knew what you were looking for. I knew what didn't add up. The parcel value was $2.3 million on the 2021 appraisal. It was transferred out of the company's ledger with no board approval, no record of Harold being informed, no documentation in any of the meeting minutes I could access. "You took it directly to Derek." "I thought it was a filing error," Marcus said. "I thought someone had made a mistake in the paperwork. I brought the full reconciliation to Derek and laid it out." He turned his coffee mug in his hands. He thanked me for bringing it to him. Said he'd look into it. And then, 2 months later, I was restructured out of the company. Budget reallocation, that's what the paperwork said. My attorney tells me I have a strong wrongful termination claim. Voss Development filed a registration statement with the SEC 3 years ago, when Harold brought in outside investors, which made it a reporting company under federal securities law. Under federal whistleblower protection law, specifically the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, employees who report suspected financial fraud in good faith cannot be legally terminated as retaliation for that report. But the financial fraud itself, the undisclosed transfer, the beneficial ownership, that's what matters here. He slid the envelope closer to me. The discovery rule in civil fraud cases means the statute of limitations starts running from the date someone discovers the fraud, not from when it was committed. I found this 8 months ago. The clock started then. I picked up the envelope. I thought about 8 years of maintaining other people's records. I thought about Harold writing Marcus Webb's name into a trust document as the most honest man Derek ever fired, and I understood exactly what Harold had seen in him. "Can I ask you something?" Marcus said. Yes. Did you know any of it before today? I was quiet for a moment. Outside the diner window, a couple was walking a dog down the Sunday empty street. Normal. Ordinary. The kind of life that runs parallel to everything that had just happened in the past 14 hours and doesn't register that anything is different. I knew something was wrong, I said. I just kept deciding that knowing wouldn't help me, that it would only cost me. Marcus nodded slowly, not with judgment and not with sympathy, exactly more with the recognition of someone who had seen the same mechanism from the outside. That's how they keep people, he said. They make knowing feel more dangerous than not knowing. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. He had just described 8 years of my life in one sentence, and we both understood that. I paid for the coffee. Marcus and I exchanged contact information, and he gave me his attorney's card. We shook hands in the parking lot. He had the look of a man who had finally set something down. I drove back toward Hardenville on the same empty roads I'd come in on the manila envelope on the passenger seat beside me. Somewhere past the county line, my phone lit up on the center console. 2 missed calls from Derek, and a text message time-stamped 11:47 that morning. Where are you? The board called me this morning. What did you do? I read it at a red light. For 5 years, I had answered Derek's calls within 2 rings. I had responded to his messages before I finished reading them out of a habit so old I had stopped recognizing it as a choice. I turned the phone face down on the passenger seat and kept driving. The question he was asking, "What did you do?" was the most honest thing he had said to me in years. And I found to my own quiet surprise that I was not afraid of it. I drove back to Hardenville Sunday evening, and I slept not well, but I slept. And Monday morning, I went to my office at Voss Development for what I understood without having to decide it would be the last time. I had one conversation to have before I left that building permanently. Derek's car had not been in the driveway when I got home Sunday night. I had not looked for a note. I had gone upstairs, sat with the painting for a while in the low light, and eventually slept. Whatever was coming, it was going to come in the daylight. My office was on the 3rd floor corner position glass panel with my name etched in it. Internal Finance Manager. 8 years of files in the cabinets along the far wall. 8 years of knowing exactly where everything was and what it meant. I sat behind my desk at 8:55 and called Diane Mercer's extension. I need you in my office, I said. Right now. My voice did not leave space for a question. She heard that. She arrived in 19 minutes. She was dressed for work, but she had the look of someone who had not slept. She sat down across from me and did not quite meet my eyes, at first a small but readable signal from a person who already knew why she was there. I placed a document on the desk between us. It was a bank transfer record I had pulled from the company's financial server the previous morning in Mill Creek, forwarded to me by Raymond as part of the trust documentation he had assembled. The record showed 36 months of $3,000 monthly transfers from a Voss Development discretionary account, a budget line used for minor operational expenses that don't require individual approval, into a personal checking account registered to Diane Mercer. $108,000 total. The room was completely quiet. Diane looked at the paper. Then she looked at me. Her shoulders came down in a way that was not dramatic, just the physical release of something she had been holding upright for too long. "How long have you known?" she asked. "Since yesterday." She absorbed that. "You've been sitting on this since yesterday." "How long have you been doing this?" I said. 3 years. "What did you give him?" She looked at her hands, then back at me steadily without looking away. "Your access logs, which files you opened, which accounts you reviewed, conversations you had with board members, meeting notes from your calendar." She paused. Everything he asked for. I sat with that for a moment. 3 years of every financial move I made reported back to my husband. Every account I reviewed. Every concern I raised in a board meeting. He had known in advance what I was looking at, which meant he had also known in advance what I was not. "Did you know what he used it for?" I told myself I didn't. Her voice was level without self-pity. I knew enough not to ask. Then she reached into her bag and placed a thick folder on the desk. "Nye, I kept copies," she said, "of everything I gave him, and of everything I found on my own in the process." She pushed it toward me. The 2022 land transfer, the Delaware LLC, the board approval that should exist and doesn't, the paper trail that leads to Colton. She kept her hand on the folder for a moment before releasing it. I kept it because I was terrified that if this ever came apart, I'd have no way to prove I wasn't a participant in the underlying fraud, only in the surveillance. I opened the folder. It matched Marcus's certified documentation exactly line for line, with the addition of Diane's internal access record server, timestamps, file, path logs, the kind of administrative detail that only someone with her specific system access could have captured. "Diane, I know. You have serious legal exposure here. What you did accepting payment to monitor a colleague is not something I have the authority to protect you from." I said it plainly, not as a threat. The transfers constitute potential wire fraud. The disclosure of confidential financial information constitutes breach of fiduciary duty. Those are federal-level concerns. I can't grant you immunity. I don't have that power. The board, the shareholders, the IRS, any of them could pursue this independently of anything I decide. "I know," she said again. "I'm not asking you to." She stood, picked up her bag. At the door, she stopped. "I should have said no the first time he asked me." Her voice was quiet but not broken. "I knew that the first time he asked me. I just—" She stopped, started again. "I just want you to know I felt terrible about it from the beginning." I looked at her for a long moment. "That counts for something. I'm not sure how much." She left. I sat at my desk and looked at the two folders in front of me, Marcus's certified copies and Diane's internal documentation, and understood that what I was holding was in legal terms a significant and independently corroborated evidentiary package. The kind of thing that doesn't go away when someone says they'll look into it. I opened my laptop to forward the combined documentation to Raymond. To do that, I needed to pull one supporting file from the shared financial server, a specific lease addendum from 2019 that I wanted Raymond to have for context. I navigated to the server directory. I opened the project folder structure under Derek's executive partition. I had audited this server for 8 years. I knew every folder on it. There was one I did not recognize. It sat in a subdirectory I had accessed dozens of times. The folder name was JR Interior Designs. The last modified date in the file metadata read September 4th, 2025. 3 days before the anniversary party. I had never seen this folder before. In 8 years of working this system, I had never seen it. That left exactly 2 explanations: it had been recently created and placed where I would eventually find it, or it had been hidden well enough that I had never looked in precisely the right place until now. Neither one was a reasonable thing to find on a corporate financial server. I moved my cursor to the folder and did not click it yet. Outside my office glass, the Monday morning floor was moving through its regular rhythms: phones, keyboards, someone's coffee maker. Normal. Ordinary. I looked at the folder name again. JR Interior Designs. I knew those initials. I have always been the kind of person who reads the full document before reacting. Even when part of me already knows what I'm going to find, I read every page. I owe myself that much. The folder opened into what looked at first like a legitimate vendor file. Header formatted correctly, scope of work listed as Interior Design Consultation Services, a payment schedule showing $4,500 per month for 19 months, $85,500 total. The folder sat inside Derek's executive partition on the company server, a section I didn't routinely access, but one I was authorized to enter when pulling supporting documentation for financial reporting. I had been looking for a specific lease addendum to send Raymond. I had gone deeper into Derek's partition than I normally would. That was the only reason I found it. I checked the project completion records. There were none. No delivery confirmation, no final invoice, no sign-off on any design work being received or approved. 19 months of payments, $4,500 each, and nothing to show for any of it. The contract had been created on the same date as the first payment 19 months ago. The vendor contact listed was Jenna Reeves, freelance interior designer. I opened the message archive subfolder. It contained email chains and text message exports stored alongside the vendor file in a way that suggested Derek had wanted them connected or hadn't thought about what it would look like if someone pulled the full folder. I started reading. The first message was from Jenna, dated February 2024, 19 months ago. It was not about interior design. I read forward. Then I read backward. I read the way I read financial documents when something doesn't reconcile methodically without skipping, making myself sit with each entry before moving to the next. I found the period when Harold was dying. There were messages from that stretch of thread in June 2024, 2 months before Harold passed. Jenna had written, "His dad keeps looking at me at dinners. Does he know something?" Derek had replied 4 minutes later, "He's dying. He's not thinking about us. Don't worry about it." I read that exchange twice. I found the week Harold died. 3 days with no messages. Then they resumed. I found messages from 6 months ago in which Jenna described a Sunday afternoon at the estate. The specific one, I had driven to the city for a site visit, a trip I remembered because I'd come back early. And Derek's car had been in the driveway, and he'd said he'd been working from home. I read Derek's reply to her account of that afternoon. I closed the laptop, opened it again, read it one more time. I scrolled to the most recent messages. September 4th, 2025. 3 days before the anniversary party. Jenna, the doctor confirmed it today. 11 weeks. I don't know what to do, Derek. You said you'd handle it. Derek, 4 minutes later. Don't do anything yet. Let me get through Saturday night first. Saturday night. Their 5th wedding anniversary party. The night Natalie had carried the painting into that room. The night Sandra had called it a garage sale purchase, and Derek had said very Natalie, and soft laughter had moved through the room like a current. While all of that was happening, Derek had been waiting for Saturday night to end so he could handle an 11-week pregnancy. I closed the laptop. I set it on the desk with both hands, carefully, the way you set something down when you don't trust your own grip. I picked up my jacket. Marcus's certified documentation. Diane's folder. My bag. I walked to the elevator, through the lobby, into the parking structure. I sat in the silver Camry for a long time, engine off, both hands on the wheel. I thought about Jenna at the party. The sparkling water. The antibiotics excuse. Not looking at me. Not looking at the painting. 11 weeks pregnant, sitting next to Colton at my anniversary party in the house I had lived in for 5 years, drinking water. I picked up my phone. In my contacts, Jenna's name still had a small heart symbol beside it. I had put it there years ago, back when we were the kind of sisters who called each other on Tuesday evenings for no particular reason. I removed the heart. I did not delete the name. I was not ready to decide what to do with the name yet. I thought about one more thing before I started the car. I thought about the party, about who else had been in that room. About a woman who had sat in the corner with tea instead of champagne, whose hand had moved to the pocket of her blazer when Sandra spoke. About someone who had known Harold for 40 years and who had been placed in that room for a reason I did not yet fully understand. Patricia Howell had seen everything that happened Saturday night. She had been there, and she had been ready for something, and there was a piece of this story I was not going to find in a folder or a message thread. I started the car and drove. Patricia Howell had been Harold's closest friend for 40 years. She had watched him build a company, raise 2 sons, lose his wife to cancer in 2009, and spend the last years of his life quietly making sure one person would not be left unprotected after he was gone. When I called her Monday afternoon, she said, "I've been here since 11. I ordered you a chamomile tea. It's gone cold, but I can get another one." I found her at a corner table at Maple Street Coffee, 2 blocks off the main commercial strip in Hardinville, far enough from the Voss orbit that no one who mattered to Derek would walk through the door. She was 66, silver-haired, dressed practically. She had the stillness of someone who had been carrying a long patience and was finally setting it down. She looked at my face when I sat across from her. She didn't say anything for a moment the way people don't when they've waited long enough that urgency has worn itself out. Harold started suspecting Derek and Jenna about 21 months ago, she said before I could ask anything. Before anything was confirmed. Small things, Derek volunteering to drive Jenna to the airport when it wasn't necessary. Jenna stopping making eye contact with Harold at family dinners. Sandra becoming warm toward Jenna in a way she had never once managed toward you. He told me, she continued, I have no proof, but I know my son. I know what he looks like when he wants something he isn't supposed to want. That was before the relationship started, I said. Before it was in writing, Patricia said quietly. Harold had been watching his son for longer than that. She told me that Harold had finalized the trust through Raymond within weeks of that conversation 20 months ago. He had already been planning it, and what he suspected about Derek and Jenna had only made him move faster. The land transfer had been completed and the document executed before Natalie had even stretched the first canvas. He had 2 years to tell me, I said. Why didn't he? He tried. Patricia's voice was careful. Once, about 6 months before he died. He asked you to come to his study alone. You would have been at the estate for a Sunday dinner, I think. And he started. He said, there are things about Derek that I think you should know. She paused. Do you remember? I went still. I remembered. I had been exhausted that day, a difficult week at work, a difficult weekend before that. I had been in the particular state of someone who is running on maintained calm and knows that any disruption will collapse the whole structure. Harold had started speaking, and I had done what I always did. When conversations moved toward territory I wasn't ready to enter, I had spoken over it gently before it could reach me. Harold, I know things aren't perfect, but I'm okay. I promise. And then I had changed the subject, and he had let me. I stopped him, I said. He let you stop him, Patricia said. There's a difference. She turned her teacup once. He told me afterward, she's not ready. If I push now, she'll hold on tighter just to survive it. I'll make sure she has everything she needs until she's ready on her own. I looked at the cold tea in front of me. He built me an exit before I knew I needed one, I said. He built you a foundation, Patricia said. What you build on it is yours to decide. She reached into the pocket of her jacket and set her phone on the table between us. A voice recording already pulled up. She pressed play. The room noise of the anniversary party filled the small speaker background conversations, the clink of glasses, 30 people moving through a lit room. Then Sandra's voice, clear and unhurried, the particular clarity of a directional microphone attachment Patricia had clipped to the inside of her blazer pocket. The words garage sale came through without ambiguity. The timing, the tone, the laughter that followed. Patricia stopped the recording. Harold told me a year ago, she said. He said, if it happens at a party, you'll need to be close, and you'll need it clean. He mailed me the recorder 3 weeks before the party, a small directional attachment already charged with a single instruction written on the envelope clip inside left breast pocket press record when Sandra speaks. I was a guest in that room. I was present for the conversation. Under one-party consent law, the recording is clean. Why did Sandra organize the party? I asked. She never cared before. Patricia looked at me steadily. Sandra has known about Derek and Jenna for at least a year. The party was an audition. She needed to create a public humiliation, and she needed witnesses. I believe she thought that if you were shamed publicly, you would quietly leave Derek rather than fight. She didn't know about the trust. She didn't know what Harold had set in motion. She paused. She thought the most efficient way to remove you was to make you feel too small to stay. She underestimated you the same way everyone in that family underestimated you, and for the same reason she confused quiet with weak. I thought about that for a moment. 5 years of being quiet, 8 years of reading footnotes. The way the two things had seemed for so long like the same quality in different rooms. Then Patricia said, almost as an addition, Harold spoke very highly of Raymond's son, Ethan. He told Raymond, that young man has honest eyes, the kind that don't change depending on who's in the room. Harold didn't say things like that without a reason. I looked at the table. I thought about a glass of water placed beside my hand without any words. I thought about the particular quality of attention that doesn't perform itself. Patricia was watching me. She didn't say anything else about it. My phone buzzed on the table. A message from Raymond Derrick has been contacted by the board. His personal attorney called our office this afternoon. I want you to know his attorney reviewed the trust structure and land ownership history for 2 hours this afternoon. They will not be filing a contest. Patricia watched me read it. She waited. What will you do now? She asked. I put the phone into my jacket pocket next to Harold's letter. I thought about the estate Derrick's Range Rover in the drive, my things still in the bedroom, the painting leaning against the wall. I thought about what it meant to go back there one more time, not because I belonged to it, but because I had something left to collect. There's one thing I need to do tonight, I said before any of the rest of it becomes real. There is a particular kind of pain that doesn't have a clean name. The pain of understanding that the thing you thought you'd lost was never entirely the thing you thought you'd had. I drove through Hardenville that evening trying to find a word for it, and every time I got close, the word slipped sideways into something that wasn't quite right. Grief wasn't right. Anger wasn't right either, though. I had moved through something like anger that morning in the parking structure and come out the other side into something quieter and more permanent. What I was left with was closer to the feeling of reading a document you've been holding for years and finally understanding what the footnotes actually said. I didn't go to the estate right away. I parked on a side street 2 blocks from Voss Development engine running, and I sat with the full weight of everything I had accumulated in 36 hours. The trust documents, Marcus's certified copies, Diane's folder with its 36 months of transfer records, Patricia's voice recording clean and unambiguous, Harold's letter folded in my jacket pocket pressed against my side, his voice on a laptop screen saying you were never invisible. And underneath all of it, the thing I had been circling since Sunday morning without letting myself land on it directly, 2017. I had been at Voss Development for 3 months when Harold offered me the full-time position. The work was interesting. Harold made offers that felt like being recognized rather than just hired. I had said yes because it made sense, because I was good at it, because the morning I walked into that building, I had felt for the first time in a long time like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Derrick started buying me coffee on Thursday mornings 6 weeks after I joined full-time. Black no sugar, something I had mentioned once in passing during a budget meeting and immediately forgotten I'd said. At the time, I had thought he pays attention. I had found it touching the specific attentiveness of someone who listens carefully enough to remember small things. I understand now what he was paying attention to. What Raymond had shared with me from Harold's private notes kept separately from the trust document itself, a personal record Harold had maintained and left specifically for this kind of reckoning. Was this in early 2017? Harold gave Derrick an ultimatum. Demonstrate personal stability within 1 year or the governance structure of Voss Development would shift to a nonprofit model. That shift would eliminate Derrick's ability to draw personal profit from the company's operations. Harold had been watching his son for years by then. He knew what Derrick was capable of building and what he was equally capable of dismantling. The ultimatum was not punitive. It was the last attempt of a father who still believed in early 2017 that redirection was possible. Derrick had understood exactly what Harold meant by stability, and he had done the calculation with the efficiency of someone who approaches problems architecturally, identify the load-bearing element, place it correctly, and the structure holds. He needed someone with maximum access to the company's financial architecture, someone whose perceived position within the organization was low enough that no one would think twice about what she knew, someone intelligent enough to be genuinely useful, someone careful enough that he trusted she would not look too closely at the things she was not supposed to see, someone whose external network was limited enough that if things went wrong, containment would be manageable. He had chosen me. I sat in the parked car on that side street and let that understanding settle completely without rushing it or softening it. Not with rage. Rage would have been easier in some ways. This was colder than rage. This was the specific clarity of a thing you have been building toward without realizing it, arriving all at once in the front seat of a silver Toyota Camry on a Monday evening in early September. I had believed I was chosen because I was loved. I was chosen because I was useful and believed to be manageable. Harold had known. Not immediately, not completely, but enough, and early enough. In the spring of 2019, about a year before the wedding, he had asked me during one of those evenings we spent talking in his study while Derek was at a client dinner. "Do you really want this?" He had not specified what this was. He hadn't needed to. We both understood he was asking about the shape of the life being assembled around me. Not the job, not the company, not any individual piece of it. I had said yes. I had meant it fully. I was young, and I believed in what I was being offered, and Harold could not take that from me without damaging something in me he was not willing to damage. He was not the kind of man who destroyed what he was trying to protect. So he had let me say yes. He had not argued. He had not insisted. He had listened to my yes with the expression of someone absorbing information they will carry carefully, and he had gone home that night and within a few months begun the process of building the irrevocable trust. He asked me, I said quietly to the empty car, and I said yes. And he spent the next 2 years making sure I would be okay anyway. I drove to the estate. Derek's Range Rover was not in the drive. Sandra's car was not there either. The house was completely dark the way it only got when no one was home, and no one had thought to leave a light on. I let myself in with the key I was about to leave on the kitchen counter, walked through the entry hallway without turning on the overheads, and went upstairs. I took 2 suitcases from the hall closet. I packed methodically the way I did everything: clothes, personal financial documents from my desk drawer, my own laptop, the chargers, and the small things that accumulate in a life and are easily forgotten. From the nightstand, I took the framed photograph, the only one I had of Harold and me together, taken at a company event 3 years ago. We were both mid-laugh at something off camera. I had never known who took it. I wrapped the painting carefully in the same brown craft paper I had carried from the storage room Saturday night and set it against the suitcases. In the kitchen, I poured a glass of water and stood at the window for a moment. 24 hours ago, I had stood in this same spot after the party, feeling the particular smallness of someone who has just been publicly reduced in a room full of people who watched and said nothing useful. I did not feel that now. I felt tired in a completely different way, the tiredness that comes after something heavy has finally been set down, when your body is still adjusting to the absence of the weight. I placed my house key on the kitchen counter. I did not leave a note. I had spent 8 years leaving notes, explanations, context, careful apologies for taking up space. The key was sufficient. It said everything a note would have said without the words. I loaded the suitcases and the painting into the Camry and stood at the foot of the driveway for a moment looking at the house. Dark windows, the porch light Harold had installed himself 15 years ago that Derek had never once thought to update or replace. Derek was at his attorney's office right now, being told in precise legal language that the land transfer was valid, the trust was irrevocable, and there was nothing to contest. He had chosen to be there instead of here. That choice, the last one he would make as my husband, told me everything I needed to know about every choice that had come before it, going back to a Thursday morning in 2017 when a cup of black coffee appeared on my desk, and I thought someone was finally paying attention. I got in the car. For the first time in 5 years, I had somewhere specific to be. The street unrolled ahead of me in the dark, and I let it. I had left the estate on Briar Hill Road with 2 suitcases, a wrapped painting, a framed photograph, and a laptop bag, and I had not looked back at the house because I understood somewhere in the part of me that had been quietly finishing sentences for years that looking back would not have been grief, it would have been habit. And I was done with that particular habit. I drove without a destination the way you drive when the decision has already been made and the body just needs time to catch up to it. Hardinville at night was amber and quiet, the streets mostly empty, the traffic lights cycling through their colors for no one in particular. I had the heater on low. The back seat held everything I was taking from 8 years, and it did not feel like enough weight for that long. My phone rang at a red light on Maple Street. Ethan Caldwell's name on the screen. I picked up. "Are you okay?" he said. "Not, there's been a development, or Raymond asked me to call. Just, are you okay, plain and first, before anything else." I sat with that for a moment. The light stayed red. "I'm not completely okay," I said. "But I'm not scared. That's new." There was a pause on his end, the kind that means someone is actually listening, not simply waiting for a gap to speak into. Then, Raymond asked me to reach out. "Gabe Ortiz called the office about an hour ago. Derek contacted him this afternoon." I turned right off Maple without signaling. What did Derek want? He offered Gabe $15,000 in cash. Ethan said, his voice steady in the way of someone who had already processed the shock and was delivering the information cleanly. "For all footage from the anniversary party and anything else shot on Voss property in the past 18 months. Every file, every backup copy." I let that settle. 15,000. Cash. Derek had not waited 48 hours after the board call before deciding the camera represented a threat. He didn't know precisely what was on it, not the full scope of it, but he had calculated the risk the same way I had once calculated quarterly projections quickly without sentiment based on exposure. "Gabe refused," Ethan continued. "He called Raymond immediately after. Raymond said Gabe has something Harold left for you and he'd like to give it to you in person. Tonight, if you're willing." A brief pause. "Raymond said the decision was entirely yours." "Give me the address," I said. Birch Street was 11 minutes from the intersection where I was sitting. I drove it with the radio off the city, moving past the windows in segments a hardware store with its gate pulled down, a closed diner, a pharmacy still lit inside a row of maples already beginning to turn at the edges. I thought about $15,000 in cash. I thought about what it meant that Derek had moved that fast, that cleanly, before he even knew what he was trying to erase. It meant he was afraid. And Derek afraid was a version of him I had not seen often, which meant it was a version of him that told the truth. Gabe Ortiz's studio occupied the ground floor of a narrow brick building on the east side of Birch Street, a renovated space with high ceilings and large front windows, the kind of place assembled over time by someone who cared more about the work than the impression. A hand-lettered sign above the door read, "G. Ortiz Photography," in clean black paint. The lights were on inside. He opened the door before I knocked. Gabe was in his early 30s, compact and unhurried, with the particular stillness of someone who spent most of his professional life observing rather than being observed. I had seen him at the anniversary party 3 nights earlier, moving through the living room with a camcorder, quiet and professional, close enough to capture everything without making himself felt. I had not spoken to him directly that evening. I had barely registered him as a person, rather than a piece of the room's machinery. "Mrs. Voss," he said, "come in." The studio smelled of developing solution and aged wood. One wall held a large grid of contact sheets, rows of small images, architectural shots, landscapes, faces caught in the middle of something. A wide oak desk sat at the center of the room. On it, 2 ceramic mugs and a small pot with dried daisy flowers pressed into the glaze. "Chamomile," Gabe said, nodding at the mugs. "I didn't know what you'd want. It seemed like the right guess." I sat across from him. "Thank you for refusing him." He shook his head slightly, the small definitive gesture of someone for whom the refusal had not required deliberation. "Harold was clear with me from the start. Everything I filmed goes through Caldwell. No exceptions, No side arrangements. He set his hands flat on the desk. Derek's offer wasn't a surprise. Harold told me someone might try. I looked at him. Harold told you to expect a bribe. He said to expect pressure. He didn't call it a bribe. Specifically, he said someone might offer me something to make footage disappear, and that if that happened, I should call Raymond and do nothing else. Gabe reached into the top drawer and placed a manila envelope on the desk between us. He also left this for you. He gave it to me 14 months ago. He said I would know when to hand it over. The envelope was sealed with a single strip of tape. On the front, in Harold's handwriting, the same careful, deliberate script I recognized from the trust letter, 4 words, for Natalie. With love. I opened it slowly. Inside was a single photograph matte paper roughly 4 by 6 inches. The image was slightly warm at the edges, the way film photographs sometimes are imprecise at the borders, honest at the center. It was me, in my garage. I was sitting on a low wooden stool in front of a canvas, a brush in my right hand, leaning slightly forward into the work. My hair was loose. I was not wearing a work expression. I was not performing concentration. I simply was concentrated, entirely absorbed paint on my forearm and on the front of my shirt, afternoon light, falling in from the left at a low angle. I had not known there was a camera. It was obvious in every line of my posture that I had not known. On the back in Harold's hand, here is the shape of purpose. I sat with it in the quiet of the studio for a long moment. He came in May of last year, Gabe said carefully. He asked to borrow my smallest camera, said he only needed 1 frame. He stood in the doorway of your garage. You were painting and didn't hear him come in. He took 1 shot, handed the camera back, and didn't say much. Gabe paused. He stood there watching you for a while before he left. I don't think he wanted to interrupt it. I turned the photograph over again. Here is the shape of purpose. 7 words. Harold had looked at me from a doorway I hadn't known he was standing in, and seen something I hadn't yet seen in myself, and he had kept the evidence of it for 14 months, and trusted Gabe to deliver it at the right time. Gabe walked me out 20 minutes later. The night air on Birch Street was cool and carried the faint smell of rain still an hour away. I had the envelope folded inside my jacket pocket, the photograph safe inside it. My phone buzzed. An unknown number. The contact displayed a single name, Colton. The message read, I know where you are. We need to talk before this goes any further. You don't understand what you're doing with this family. I stood on the sidewalk and read it twice. 8 years of being told I didn't understand. 8 years of being useful and careful and manageable and not quite visible enough to be a threat. I put the phone in my jacket pocket next to the envelope, next to the photograph of a woman painting in her garage who had not yet been told what she was capable of. I got into the Camry and drove. I signed the lease on apartment 3C at Riverside Arms in June, 3 months before the anniversary party. I told Derek it was a workspace somewhere I could focus during complex audits without distraction. He nodded and didn't ask further. I told myself that was the reason I rented it. Standing at the door on Monday night with 2 suitcases and a wrapped painting, I understood that I had been building my own exit without being willing to call it that. The hallway smelled of fresh paint and the particular stillness of a building where most people are already asleep. I carried everything up the stairs myself. 2 trips the painting last held flat against my forearm, the way you carry something you don't want to damage. The elevator worked, but I took the stairs anyway. I needed the weight of it. Apartment 3C was exactly as I had left it in June. 1 bed, 1 table, 2 chairs, 1 lamp. The walls were bare. The window faced east. I had bought the basics in an afternoon and told myself I was being practical. A place to think. A place to work. A room that asked nothing of me. I leaned the painting against the living room wall, not hung, just resting there, where I could see it from anywhere in the room, and sat down on the floor in front of it. The brown paper was still on it. I didn't unwrap it again. I had already seen it tonight in the conference room in Gabe's studio, in my memory of Sandra's face when she pulled the paper back at the party. I knew what was beneath the wrapping. I just needed it in the room. I sat with the party for a while, Sandra's voice carrying across 30 people, the particular quality of laughter that isn't warm, the kind that signals permission that tells a room it's acceptable to find something small. I had watched it move through the guests the way a current moves through water invisible until you see what it does to the surface. Derek's half smile. Jenna's eyes fixed somewhere over my shoulder. The painting propped against the gift table like something already decided. Harold's voice came back to me then, not the video, but the real thing. The memory of sitting in his office in July of 2024, while afternoon light came through half-drawn curtains. You have never been invisible. I had not believed him when he was alive. I believed him now, which felt like the cruelest possible timing and also somehow exactly right. I thought about Jenna. 11 weeks. She had sat at that party with her sparkling water and her careful stillness, and I had noticed nothing, which meant either I hadn't been looking or I had trained myself not to. I wasn't sure yet which was true, and I wasn't sure it mattered. What I felt about Jenna didn't resolve into a single emotion because it wasn't a single thing. There was something like sadness for the version of her that had made a long series of poor choices and was now carrying the consequence of them. There was something like the cold recognition of a pattern I should have seen sooner. There was almost nothing that felt like hatred, which surprised me. I left it unnamed for now. Some things need time before they can be called what they are. Derek I thought about differently, not with love, not with hatred, but with the exhausted clarity of someone who is finally diagnosed correctly, an illness they've been misidentifying for years. I had called it my sensitivity, my insufficiency, my failure to be the right kind of wife in the right kind of house. I had believed on some level that the discomfort I carried in that marriage was a problem I was generating rather than receiving. It wasn't. It had never been. I had always been enough. I had been, in fact, too much, too observant, too careful, too fluent in the financial language of a company I wasn't supposed to fully understand, and they had needed to remind me repeatedly of my smallness in order to keep me manageable. I said none of this out loud. The apartment was very quiet. At some point, I stood and made tea. I found a single chamomile bag in the kitchen drawer left there from June, tucked behind an unopened box of Earl Grey I didn't remember buying. I made it in the one mug I owned and stood at the east-facing window while it cooled slightly in my hands. Hardenville was quiet at 2 in the morning. A few lit windows across the street, a delivery truck moving slowly down the block. An oak tree on the opposite sidewalk had begun to turn gold at the edges, still green toward the center. Both things true at once. I stood there long enough for the tea to become the right temperature, and then stood there a little longer. I had built the frame myself. I had sourced the reclaimed oak from a salvage yard in March of 2024, cut it in the garage on a Sunday afternoon, sanded it by hand. Harold had come into the garage the following May and placed something inside the structure I was constructing, trusting that I would eventually find it. I had spent 7 months painting over it without knowing it was there. That was exactly what he had done, placed something inside the thing I was already building and trusted the timing to the structure itself. I thought he didn't hide it from me. He put it inside something I was making. He knew the difference. I went to bed at 2:47 in the morning. I lay down in the dark with Harold's photograph on the nightstand propped against the lamp facing the room and closed my eyes. I had expected sleeplessness, the kind that comes after a day that has rearranged everything. Instead, I slept without difficulty, more deeply than I had in months, my body finally allowing what my mind had been slowly accepting all day, that I was somewhere I had chosen, in a room that belonged only to me, and nothing about that was a compromise. I woke at 6:45 because my phone vibrated on the nightstand. Raymond's name on the screen. A text message sent at 6:42 a.m. Derek and Sandra are requesting a meeting. I've told them I'll relay the request. You are under no obligation. Whatever you decide, I'd encourage you to decide on your own terms at a time and location of your choosing. I read it twice. Then I looked at the painting across the room, still leaning against the living room wall, still wrapped, catching the first gray light coming through the east window. I thought about terms. I had spent 5 years operating on other people's terms, Derek's terms, Sandra's terms, the terms of whatever room I had been permitted to enter, and whatever role I had been assigned inside it. The party had been on Sandra's terms. The marriage had been structured on Derek's. Even the painting had been unveiled on their schedule in their house in front of their guests. I picked up the phone. I typed a reply to Raymond. Tell them I'll be in touch. I'll choose the day. I set the phone face down on the nightstand. I lay back against the pillow and looked at the ceiling for a moment, the apartment quiet around me, the city just beginning to wake outside the window. Then I got up because there was work to do, and for the first time in a very long time, I was the one deciding what that meant. I told Raymond to let Derek and Sandra know they could come to Riverside Arms at 9, not because I owed them the meeting I knew I didn't, but because there were things I had never said out loud, and I wanted to say them in my own home, standing in front of the painting I had made with my own hands on my own terms. I was ready before 8. I made coffee, stood at the east window while it brewed, and watched the street below fill slowly with a Tuesday morning drizzle. The oak across the road was darker in the rain, its turning leaves gone muted and heavy. I had slept well. That still surprised me. At 8:52, Derek's black Range Rover appeared at the far end of the block and pulled to the curb below. I watched it from the window, coffee in hand, the painting behind me against the living room wall. Then I saw what was behind it. A dark sedan. I recognized the one Jenna had been driving since last year. It parked 3 car lengths back and did not move. Through the rain-blurred windshield, I could make out a figure with dark shoulder-length hair sitting very still behind the wheel. She didn't get out. She wasn't meant to, I thought. She was just there. She knew this address because Derek had told her about it. The workspace Natalie rented. I had read it in the messages without fully registering it at the time, the way you read past something that doesn't yet have a frame around it. He had mentioned this apartment to her in at least 3 separate exchanges across 19 months of messages. She had known about this space before I had fully acknowledged its purpose to myself. That landed in a particular way I didn't have a word for yet. I set down my coffee and went to the door. 3 knocks. Precise and evenly spaced Derek's boardroom knock, the one he used for every room he entered expecting to be accommodated. I opened the door. He was in a dark coat with rain on the shoulders, his face composed in the careful, neutral expression he wore when he was managing something. Sandra stood half a step behind him in a charcoal blazer, her hair pressed flat at the edges from the walk-in. They looked like people who had spent 2 days in a world that had stopped cooperating, and whose first instinct was still to come to the person they had underestimated and ask her to straighten it out. I stepped back from the doorway without inviting them in. They entered anyway. The painting was visible behind me, resting against the living room wall, the brown paper partially unwrapped from the night before. Neither of them looked at it directly, but both of them registered it. I saw that. Derek spoke first. Natalie, my lawyer reviewed the trust documentation. We won't be contesting the land transfer. But there are still operational questions. The ground lease, the headquarters, the company's ongoing. The ground lease converts to fair market rate effective from the date of transfer, I said. Raymond's office sent the terms to your attorney this morning. He stopped. He hadn't known that yet. I watched him recalibrate the way I had watched him recalibrate in board meetings when the numbers didn't match his assumption, that brief stillness before the pivot. Sandra moved forward then. Her voice was softer than I had ever heard it. The social register stripped away by 2 days of consequence, leaving something underneath that was quieter and older. Natalie, sweetheart, Saturday night we weren't thinking clearly. It was a long evening, and people had been drinking, and things were said that, you planned that evening, I said. You chose the guest list. You chose the catering. You proposed the public gift opening. I looked at her steadily. You built a stage, Sandra. The softness left her face. What remained was something I had glimpsed only occasionally in 8 years. Not cruelty exactly, but the tiredness of a woman who had been managing outcomes for so long she had forgotten it was a choice. Derek tried again, pivoting to what he knew. This doesn't have to destroy everything. There are ways to structure this that work for everyone involved. The company, the assets, your position, nothing has to be. How many weeks is she now? The question dropped into the room like a door closing. Derek went still. 11 weeks at the party, I said. She confirmed it on September 4th. That puts her at 14 weeks this week. Sandra made a small involuntary sound. I turned to her. You knew. That's why you organized the party. You needed me publicly humiliated. You thought I would leave quietly rather than push back. It was faster and cleaner than a conversation. Sandra did not answer. She did not deny it. In not denying it, she confirmed everything the way silence in a financial audit confirms what the numbers already suggest. Derek said very quietly, all the scaffolding of his authority finally gone. Please. It was the first time in 5 years he had said that word to me without attaching a task to it. Not please handle this or please make this manageable, just please alone, weightless and overdue. I looked at him. The man I had painted from memory and from what I had once believed was love. The man Harold had tried to warn me about 6 months before his death, and whom I had spent 8 years filing under my own inadequacy rather than reading clearly. Harold didn't leave me that land because he hated you, I said. He left it to me because he loved me. Those are different things. I used to not understand the difference. I stepped back and held the door. Goodbye, Derek. He stood in the doorway for a moment long enough that I thought he might say something else. He didn't. He turned and walked down the stairs without looking back. Sandra followed. At the bottom of the stairwell, she glanced up once, and the expression on her face was something I couldn't fully name. Not quite regret. Something older and more tired than regret, the look of a woman who had played a long game and arrived at the end of it to find the board had been rearranged while she wasn't watching. I closed the door. I stood with my back against it for a moment, listening. Below, the Range Rover's engine started that clean, expensive sound I had heard every morning for 5 years and would not miss. Then, after a pause, the sedan. I went to the window and watched both vehicles move down the wet Hardenville street. The sedan was last. I watched it until it reached the corner and turned and was gone. I didn't know yet what I would do about Jenna. That pain was different from this one. It was quieter and more complicated, the kind that doesn't arrive fully formed, but waits until you have enough stillness to look at it directly. It would need a different kind of day. I turned back to the room. The painting was there. The coffee was still warm. The east window let in gray light and the sound of rain. I sat down at the table and opened my laptop. After they left, I opened my laptop and sat at the table for a few minutes without typing anything. Then I closed it again and stood up, and I stayed in the middle of the apartment for a long time without moving. Not because I didn't know what to do next, but because I wanted to feel the shape of this moment before it became the past. The rain had slowed. I could hear it still softer now against the window, and the street below had that particular quiet that follows the end of something. I made coffee. I stood at the east window while it brewed and watched the oak across the road dripping onto the sidewalk, its turning leaves darker and heavier in the wet. A single yellow leaf released from a branch while I watched, caught the light for a moment and came to rest flat against the damp concrete below. Both things at once, I thought again. Still attached and already falling. I called Raymond at 10:10. He picked up on the second ring. His voice was steady and unhurried the way it always was, the voice of a man who had spent 30 years making certain that the structures he built did not collapse under pressure. The transfer is recorded, he said before I could ask. It's a matter of public record as of this morning. Derek's legal team accepted the ground lease conversion terms. No contest filed, none expected. And the board Voss Development's board received Marcus's documentation and the materials Diane provided. They've opened a formal investigation into the 2022 land transaction. Outside counsel has been engaged independent firm, not connected to Voss or Caldwell. I absorbed that. Marcus's certified copy. Diane's access logs, the Delaware LLC paperwork, the missing board approval. All of it now in front of a board that could no longer claim it hadn't seen the evidence. What happens to Colton? That depends on what the investigation finds. The board's outside counsel will determine scope. What I can tell you is that Marcus's documentation is solid, and Colton's reduced voting share, the 2019 amendment, is part of the record the board is now reviewing. A pause. Whether Colton cooperates or contests will shape the outcome significantly. That part isn't mine to predict. And Diane, she cooperated fully and voluntarily. That distinction matters under federal sentencing guidelines, and it will matter to the district attorney's office when they review the file. The process will take time. I won't speculate on the result, but the cooperation is noted and it is real. I looked out the window. The street was beginning to dry at the edges. I had one thing left to address before the week was done. That morning, I texted Colton not to arrange a meeting, but to be clear. I wrote, "I know what the 2019 amendment did to your voting share. I know what Derek arranged. I'm not your enemy in this. What happens next belongs to the board and the investigation, not to me. Whatever you decide to do with what you know, do it because it's right, not because you're out of options." He read it within 4 minutes. He didn't reply. I didn't need him to. Some conversations end not with an answer, but with the understanding that the question has finally been put correctly. "Raymond, how long did Harold know about all of it?" There was a brief silence on his end. Not hesitation, but the pause of someone choosing precision over speed. "He knew the land would go to you from the day he stopped trusting Derek with it," Raymond said. "That was approximately 4 years ago. He knew about Derek and Jenna before any of us had evidence. He said once that he noticed the way Derek changed the subject whenever her name came up at a family dinner, and Harold was a man who noticed exactly that kind of thing." Another beat. "He knew about Marcus before Marcus knew Harold knew. He spent the last 2 years of his life building a structure that could hold without him. He was very thorough." I said. "Harold would be very proud of you, Natalie." I was quiet for a moment. Outside, a second leaf let go of the oak and drifted down. "I think he already was," I said. "That's the part I'm still learning to accept." We said goodbye. I stood in the kitchen for a moment after hanging up, holding the phone loosely, looking at nothing in particular. Then I opened the junk drawer beside the stove and found behind a roll of tape and 2 expired coupons, a small hammer, and a single finishing nail. I hadn't put them there consciously. I must have in June, when I was making the apartment minimally functional and telling myself it was a workspace. I crossed to the living room. I measured by eye, centered above the small table at a height that felt right rather than calculated. I drove the nail into the wall with 3 clean strikes. I lifted the painting by its reclaimed oak frame, the wood smooth under my palms from 7 months of handling, and hung it. I stepped back. The painting looked back at me. Derek and I, taken from the wedding photograph, rendered in oil on canvas across 7 months of Sunday mornings. I had painted those faces from memory and from feeling, and from whatever had been true at the time. The painting was not a lie just because the marriage had been. I had made something real. That didn't change. Harold had said to put it where people could see it. I had done that now in a room that belonged entirely to me on a Tuesday morning after the rain. I was still standing in front of it when my phone vibrated on the table. A message from Ethan. "I've been thinking about what to say since Saturday, and I keep arriving at the same simple thing. I'd like to ask you to dinner. Not as your attorney. The legal matter closed Saturday night and today is Tuesday, and I wanted to give you time before saying this. No deadline and no pressure. Whenever you're ready, if you ever are." I read it twice. I looked at the painting. I looked at Harold's photograph propped against the lamp on the nightstand, the image of me in the garage brush in hand, unaware of the camera with, "Here is the shape of purpose" written on the back in his careful script. I thought about a glass of water placed quietly beside my hand without a word in a conference room on a Sunday morning. I thought about the phrase the most stubborn optimist he'd ever met delivered, without irony, in a voice that had honest eyes and didn't change depending on who was in the room. I typed "not yet, but maybe." I sent it. I set the phone face up on the table and waited. 53 seconds later, that is the best answer I've received all year. I almost smiled, then I actually did. I made a second cup of coffee and sat down at the table with it, the painting in front of me, and the photograph to my left and the east window, letting in the clean post-rain light that comes through glass when the sky finally decides to mean it. I opened my laptop. I had a letter to draft to the Voss Development Board from the owner of the land their headquarters sat on, outlining the terms under which that arrangement would continue. It was not a hostile letter. It was a precise one. I had just begun the first line when I heard a knock at the door. Not 3 sharp, evenly spaced strikes. Something softer than that, the knock of someone who was not certain they had the right to be there. I got up from the table and went to the door and looked through the peephole. I stood there for a moment without opening it. I had known since the moment I saw the dark sedan parked 3 car lengths behind the Range Rover in the rain that morning that this conversation would come. I had known it since I deleted a heart icon from beside a name in my contacts 2 days ago and kept the name. I had known it maybe since I sat in Gabe Ortiz's studio holding a photograph and understood that some things cannot be learned from a folder on a shared server. Some things require a room and 2 people, and the particular courage of someone who is not sure they deserve the door to open. I put my hand on the handle. I had decided how to face this conversation before it arrived. I opened the door. I had been trying to find the right word for what Jenna and I had been before. All of this. Before the messages. Before the sparkling water at the party. Before I understood what she had done with the things I told her on Tuesday nights, when I couldn't sleep. Sisters sounds too simple now. Strangers feels like it lets us both off too easily. I opened the door. She was smaller than I expected, not in height, but in presence. Her hair was down loose around her shoulders. No makeup. She was wearing the dark teal wool coat I had given her 2 birthdays ago because she said she liked it, and I told her to take it, that it suited her better anyway. Standing in my hallway on a Tuesday afternoon in September wearing my coat, she looked like someone who had made a very long series of choices and had arrived at the end of them. She looked at me. Then her gaze moved past me to the painting on the wall. She stood there for a moment just looking at it. Then she looked back at me. "Derek told me about this place," she said. "He mentioned it I found out you'd moved in, and I—" She stopped. Started again. "I know the address. I'm sorry about that too." I held the door without widening it. "What did you come to say?" "I don't know," she said, and the honesty of it landed before anything else could. "I don't have an explanation that's good enough. I'm not going to try to offer one." "Good," I said. She looked down at her hands, bare no rings, the nails cut short, and then back up. When she spoke again, her voice was careful in the way of someone who has rehearsed the sentence, but not the feeling inside it. "I used the things you told me. The things you said on those Tuesday night calls when you couldn't sleep, and Derek wasn't listening and you just needed someone to talk to." She paused. "I used them to stay closer to him. And I knew every single time that it was wrong." I looked at her. I thought about Tuesday nights in the kitchen of the Voss estate, the low lamp on the counter, the particular quality of Derek's silence from upstairs, and Jenna's voice on the other end saying, "Don't worry, he's just stressed. He does that when he's overwhelmed." I thought about what she had been doing with those conversations while I was having them, the access they gave her, the architecture of trust I had extended, and she had navigated. "Were you ever actually my sister?" I asked. Not as an accusation, as a real question, because I genuinely did not know the answer and I thought she might. Something complicated and true moved across her face. She didn't look away from it. "I think I stopped having enough courage to be," she said finally. "Somewhere along the way, I made a choice. And then I kept making that choice because I didn't know how to undo it. I know that's not an excuse. It's just what happened." I held the door and looked at her. I looked at the coat, the teal wool, the slightly worn cuffs from 2 years of regular use. I thought about the Tuesday nights and what they had meant to me, and what she had done with them, and how both of those things were true at the same time, and how some facts don't cancel each other out, but simply exist alongside each other in permanent tension. I was not angry. I had been angry quietly in the way you are angry when you realize something you thought was solid was hollow all along. But standing in the doorway, I found that what remained after the anger had settled was something more like grief, clean and specific, and not dramatic. The loss of something I thought I had, the recognition that it had not been what I believed. "You need to take care of your health," I said. "Whatever you decide about everything else, take care of yourself." She looked at me, and I saw it register the surprise of it that after everything, this was the sentence I chose. She nodded once. There was nothing performative about it. She turned and walked toward the stairwell. At the top of the stairs, she stopped her back, still to me, one hand on the railing. "The painting is beautiful," she said quietly. "It always was. I said so on Saturday night, but no one heard me because they were all laughing." She went down the stairs without looking back. I closed the door. I stood in the entryway for a moment. The apartment was very quiet. I was aware of the painting behind me on the wall, the faces in it, the 7 months of Sunday mornings in the garage. The frame I had built by hand from reclaimed wood before I understood what Harold had placed inside the structure I was making. I was aware of the coat Jenna had been wearing and the address she had known before I had fully admitted why I'd rented the apartment. I was aware of the particular shape that betrayal takes when it comes from someone you loved in a specific unglamorous Tuesday night kind of way. I went to the kitchen and made chamomile tea, the last bag I would need to buy more. I carried the mug to the table, sat down in front of the painting, and drank it slowly in the quiet of a Tuesday afternoon in the apartment that was entirely mine. There was no resolution to what had just happened. I didn't look for one. Some things don't close cleanly, and pretending otherwise would be a different kind of dishonesty. I had said what was true. She had said what was true. We had stood in a doorway and been honest with each other for perhaps the first time in a very long time, and that was what it was. That evening, an email arrived from the chairman of the Voss Development Board. Subject line: Ownership Transition. Natalie Reeves, Voss Beneficial Owner. I read the subject line 3 times. Not because I needed to, I understood it on the first pass, the legal weight of it, the precision of the language. I read it 3 times because I wanted to feel it become ordinary, because I thought that if I read it enough times, it might begin to feel like what it actually was. Not Derek's wife, not the internal finance manager, not the woman who had spent 8 years reading footnotes in rooms where no one thought she was paying full attention. Beneficial owner. I set my phone face down on the table beside the mug and sat with the painting for a while in the last light of the day. The morning after Jenna left, I woke before the light, before the street noise, before the phone, before anything was required of me, and I lay in the quiet of my own apartment and let myself feel what 5 days had made inside me. It didn't feel the way I expected aftermath to feel. There was no dramatic settling, no single emotion that rose above the others and declared itself the truth of the thing. There was something more, like the morning after a storm, a specific cleared quality of air, and the awareness that the landscape had shifted and that it was now necessary to take stock of what remained. I made real coffee. I had brought the small machine from the estate, one of the few things I had taken that was not strictly personal, justified to myself on the grounds that I had bought it. I stood at the east window while it brewed and watched Hardenville come into morning. The oak across the road had lost 2 more leaves overnight. The sidewalk below was nearly dry. I thought about Harold. Not only with grief the way I had thought about him for 14 months, with grief first and everything else underneath it compressed into something too heavy to examine. I thought about him with something that was like gratitude, like guilt, like love, all of it pressed into a single feeling I did not have one word for. I thought he built me a foundation while I was too busy surviving his family to notice. I thought he stood in a garage doorway and watched me paint for months without saying a word, because he did not want to interrupt it. He had known the shape of what I was making before I did. He had trusted the structure to hold what he placed inside it, and he had been right. I looked at Gabe's photograph propped against the lamp, the image of me at the canvas, unaware of the camera brush in my right hand, paint on my forearm, afternoon light, coming in from the left. Here is the shape of purpose. I had looked at that photograph a dozen times since Sunday night, and each time I saw something slightly different in it. This morning I saw steadiness, a person fully occupied by what she was making, not by who was watching. I thought about the 7 months I had spent painting. I had believed I was making something for Derek. I understood now that I had been making something for myself, the hours, the Sunday mornings, the choices about color and light and patience, and when to leave something alone, and when to return to it. I had been practicing, without knowing it, the skill I would need, most the skill of building something real with my own hands and refusing to let anyone else define its value. I said it aloud quietly to the empty apartment. That's what he gave me, not just the land, the proof that I had already been doing it. I picked up the phone. There were several messages I hadn't yet answered. A new attorney referred by Raymond handling the formal ownership transition for the 47-acre parcel. A follow-up from the board chairman's office about the ground lease terms and the first scheduled review. A contractor asking preliminary questions about asset management protocols for a building that was now legally mine to administer. I answered all of them methodically, with the same attention I had always brought to other people's documents applied now to my own. 1 month later, October 2025. The apartment had changed in small ways. Books on the shelf my own, not the ones Derek had approved of for the living room. A print from a local artist on Birch Street above the kitchen table purchased because I wanted it, and for no other reason. A small jade plant on the windowsill that was against reasonable expectation still alive. The painting remained centered on the wall above the main table. I had thought about painting a new one, a canvas that belonged entirely to this life, this apartment, this version of what I was building. I might still. I hadn't decided. Harold had said to put it where people could see it, and I was still learning the full depth of that instruction, what it meant to make something and place it in plain sight, and let it mean what it meant without explanation or apology. I had dinner with Ethan 3 weeks earlier. A quiet restaurant on the west side of Hardinville, small, the kind of place that doesn't hurry you. We talked for 2 hours about Harold, about the oaks on Maple Street, about whether purpose is something you find or something you build from what you already have. He thought it was built. I told him I thought Harold would have said both, depending on the day. I didn't let him walk me home. He didn't offer. On the sidewalk outside the restaurant, he looked at me with the particular directness I had first noticed in the hallway of Raymond's office on a Sunday morning, and he said, "Same time next week." I said, "Maybe." He nodded once, unhurried. "I'm learning that's your word for yes." I laughed. A real laugh, the kind that arrives without announcement before you've had a chance to decide whether the moment deserves it. I am still building the next version of my life. I know it involves 47 acres and a building that belongs to me now in law, as well as in the structure Harold spent 2 years constructing around the fact. I know it involves the work I always did, but was never credited for, now attached to my name. I know it involves this apartment, the painting, the photograph, the jade plant, and the second chair at the table, which I should note was there before Ethan first came by, because I had decided some time ago that I was done furnishing my life for one. I know it involves, in some form, allowing myself to be seen by someone who has no reason to manage me. I am learning what that feels like. It is different from what I expected. It is quieter, more ordinary, and more real. The rest I am building as I go. If you have ever spent years making yourself smaller so that someone else could feel larger, if you have ever stood in a room and understood that the smallness they assigned to you was never the truth about you, I hope this story found you where you are. The people who needed you invisible were counting on you not to look too closely at your own actual size. Harold knew that size before I could. I am still slowly, honestly learning to agree with him. Thank you for staying with me through this. If something in this story stayed with you, leave me something in the comments. Tell me what it brought up. Share it with someone who might need it. And if you want to sit with more stories like this one, I will be here. The final image is this me at the window. An October morning. The oaks on Maple Street have turned completely amber deep gold and a color with no name that lives between them. Hardenville is waking up below. Somewhere in the building, a door opens and closes the ordinary sound of an ordinary Wednesday, the sound of a life that is entirely mine. The painting on the wall. The copper key still on the table, I haven't put it away. I've left it there in the morning light where anyone who visits can see it. Some things are worth keeping where they can be seen. There is something I learned through all of this not from a document, but from an old man with a bowl of spearmint candy on his desk and enough love to build something that outlasted him. He used to say that God doesn't waste the years we spend learning. He just holds them until we're ready. I didn't believe that until I was standing in a storage room at midnight holding a copper key, realizing every year I spent invisible had been preparation. This is a story about family betrayal in its quietest form, the kind that hides inside routine and loyalty until you've forgotten how to see it. I lived inside that family betrayal for 8 years and called it a marriage. That was my mistake. Don't make it yours. Don't wait for someone else to build your exit. Don't call shrinking yourself keeping the peace. Don't hand people the blueprint of your inner life and trust them not to use it. Family betrayal rarely looks like a villain. It looks like someone you loved sitting at a dinner table laughing at the wrong moment. Family revenge is not what I went looking for. I went looking for the truth. But family revenge has a way of finding you anyway, when you stop shrinking, and the room has to rearrange itself around your actual size. The most complete form of family revenge is not destruction. It is becoming exactly who they told you that you weren't quietly and thoroughly until there is nothing left to argue with. That is my personal view. I've thought about it carefully and I'm keeping it. If this story stayed with you, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe if you want more. I'll be here. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the end. A note going forward, some stories ahead contain fictional elements built to explore real human experiences. If that's not for you, that's perfectly fine. Choose what serves you best. But if you're willing to stay, I think there's more here worth hearing.